Welcome, everyone. This is another SDEC webinar. This webinar is going to be in the topic area of business intelligence and will focus on Domo dashboarding. My name is Adam Greco, and I will be hanging out during the webinar to answer any questions or deal with any problems that you have during the webinar. If you run into any technical difficulties, you can message me in the Zoom chat. And during the webinar, at any point in time, if you have questions for Sean to answer after the presentation is over, you can add that to the Zoom Q&A. Please add your questions to the Q&A, and please limit your technical questions to the chat, which I'll be monitoring. So if you haven't been to an SDEC webinar before, this is a free education community around 12 topics related to digital analytics. If you want to join the SDEC, or maybe someone forwarded this invite to you, you can join for free. And I'm going to give instructions and provide a link to join in the chat as we're going through the presentation. So thank you again for joining. And Sean, I will hand it off to you.
Wait a minute, Adam, this is free? I thought I was getting paid for this. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you guys so much for joining. I really appreciate your time. I know everybody's time is super valuable. But my name is Sean McClain. I'm a data analyst for Search Discovery. One of my primary roles at Search Discovery is using business intelligence platforms, and specifically the Domo platform. So we're going to be going over, basics dashboarding today, all the way through, advanced tips and tricks, and we're going to be utilizing the Domo tool. So to keep that in mind, I just wanted to start the presentation out with a shameless plug for Domo. It's a great cloud-based platform. If you guys are creating visualizations in your organization, I highly recommend you take a look at Domo. They let you create super dynamic visualizations and collaborate with stakeholders from, coworkers to people outside your department. I've done customer-facing reports. You can even share them with your grandma and your aunt or whoever you want. It's very collaborative in that way. And the reason that you can do that is because it's a very user-friendly tool. So really awesome. One of the best things about Domo is that they can connect data from so many different sources. And so if you're, no matter what kind of structure your organization has for collecting data, Domo can meet those needs. And if they don't have like one of their pre-configured connections for a data source, they can work with you to create one. So super great company, and if you ever had any question about, who do they work with or what do they do, they can handle companies as big as ESPN, and anything, as small as a startup. So just awesome. And, Adam, I wanted to kind of start with this question for the group. How many of you currently right now have ever heard of the Domo platform? And we're going to throw that poll out real quick.
Okay, see the answers coming in.
Awesome.
I'll give it another 10 seconds or so. Okay, here's your results.
Okay, cool. So we actually have it's a good mix. So it looks like about 22% of us use it a lot. And we have some people that have done it a little bit, or they use BI tools, but have never used Domo. And then a lot of people have never used it. So this is great. Like I said, this presentation is going to go over, dashboarding best practices, and it's going to be using the Domo tool. So if you see something you like, or some of the functionalities in Domo that you're not currently seeing in your BI platforms, just shoot me an email and we can talk about it. And we can talk about ways that we can, show you a little bit more about Domo. Cool. And shameless plug. So let's start from the beginning here. Let's start basic and go complicated. And the most basic we can get is, what is a dashboard? I think a lot of people, create reports and they never ask this question about, what is a dashboard? Not just in Domo or your BI platform, but in general. And so I went to the internet to figure this out. And, the infinite Google gave me an answer, which I really liked. So we're going to kind of go through this definition and break it down. So a dashboard is a type of graphical user interface, which often provides an at-a-glance views of key performance indicators that are relevant to a particular objective. So there's three things that I really like about this definition. And the first one is that at a glance, providing quick and easy to understand insights. When you're thinking about creating a report for your stakeholder, the first thing you want to do is make sure that the information that you're presenting to them is easy to understand and can provide quick insights. They don't want to be sifting through the data and trying to figure out those little nuggets. Part of your job as an analyst when you're creating your dashboard is to give them those insights that you found in the creation process. The second thing that I really liked was the key performance indicators section of this. KPIs are pretty standard across all businesses. You know, what those are referring to is information that is important to your stakeholders to determine the answers to the questions they asked when they asked you to create your report. So make sure that you have identified those KPIs with your stakeholders before doing anything in the dashboard. And then the last thing that I wanted to call out on this was relevant to a particular objective or business process. So make sure that your dashboard is providing easy and quick to understand insights using the KPIs, and that it's driving your business objectives and decision making. So the best report is utilizing all three of these things to answer the questions for your business and drive value for that business. And if you can do all three of these, then you're creating an effective dashboard. And I know you're going to hate me for this, but let's add another question in here. This is the last one, I promise. You're like, Sean, I just want to listen to you talk. But how many of you are actually currently creating dashboards for your organization right now? It can be an any BI platform tool. It doesn't have to be Domo. Keeping you guys on your toes.
We've got a fast group of answering. We're almost there. Is it 5 seconds or so? Okay, here's the results.
Oh, awesome, you guys. So it looks like 75% of you are doing, creating dashboards regularly. So this is going to be great because, it's going to review a little bit, and then we're going to give some tips and tricks at the end that hopefully you haven't been considering and that can help you really take your game to the next level. And for those people that haven't, I think there was like 25 roughly. This is a great place to dive in and learn about dashboarding. So, all right, let's move on. So before we do anything, before we touch paintbrush to canvas or, let our creative juices out in our virtual, report, we need to do a little bit of pre-work. And that's oftentimes looked over, and it's one of the most important steps when you're doing dashboarding. So let's talk about some of the questions that you want to ask before doing any dashboarding work or creating any reports. And these are, questions that I've found through, just various articles and learning, and then also through my experience working with the dozens of clients that I work with over a multitude of industries. So first and most basic question, what are your business questions? What's your stakeholder asking you to answer through your report? And this can be broken down in a couple of different questions below, but that's your first and foremost, right? What are the questions you're trying to answer with this report? Then just to piggyback off of that, you're asking, where does that information come from? Is everything coming from one data source? Are we just going to use Salesforce? Is it coming from, offline Excel sheets that we got to figure out how to implement and add into our report? Different places, and finding out where that information comes from is how we're going to pull in the information for the report. Next, what is the time frame? So what time frame is this? This is kind of a multi-dimensional question. So what's the time frame that the report is going to be, reported on? And then also, how often does the data need to be updated? Is it going to be updated every hour? Is it going to be a report that is going to be consumed weekly or quarterly? These are the questions you got to ask your stakeholders. And then the next one refers to what we were talked about in our definition for dashboarding is what are the specific KPIs to include in this report? And then all these KPIs should contribute to answering those business questions. And then just a little aside on KPIs, what are the benchmarks against those KPIs that we should be measuring? So a good example of a KPI is like total business revenue is a really simple one, right? So is there a quarterly target that we're trying to hit? And should we include that quarterly target in our dashboard? One really, really great way to answer all these questions and get your pre-work out of the way is considering what's called a measurement framework exercise. And some of you may have heard this and some of you may have not, but measurement framework exercises are a really great way to talk through the questions that your business stakeholder is asking and get those answers quickly to all these questions. This is a great example. So I work for Search Discovery again, and this is one of our templated measurement frameworks. So you can see it's all one document, just one little sheet. And we have on the left your desired outcomes, so those questions. You have some value categories that you can map those to. So is it increasing brand awareness? Is it driving product revenue? Is it some other value category? And then you go down the line, right? You have your key metrics here. What are the metrics that are going to contribute to answering that desired outcome? And targets, some would say benchmarks. Targets is another one. What are those measurements that we're trying to measure those metrics against? And then as you go even more granular to the right, you have your data sources those data are coming from, and the dimensional breakdowns that you're going to be applying to those metrics. And then the last question, and this is one that a lot of people don't ask, and it's something that is really, really important to cover, is the why. John Stewart asked why. So why are we asking these questions? What's our overarching objectives? And this is really important to ask because it will give you, number one, a deeper understanding of the dashboard that you're creating. And number two, it'll allow you to provide the insights when you're presenting the dashboard to your client or your stakeholder, whoever it may be, and give them that extra context so that they can kind of understand why you created what you created. Okay, pre-work's done. We have all the information in our brain. It's like an oversaturated sponge, but we have everything there. We got our measurement framework done. Now let's talk about dashboarding, designing, and structuring. So these are the two basic components that we're going to talk about today, and then we'll get into some advanced tips and tricks. And the first of which is dashboard basic structure. And what I've found is I've created a huge number of dashboards in my day, and oftentimes I'd say 19 out of 20 times the information is requested or best consumed when it's information is placed from left to right on the dashboard and from top to bottom. And so here's an example of a demo report that we're going to go through a little bit later in the presentation. But you can already see right away, I'm willing to bet that your eyes went straight to that top line metrics in the top left. And then you can see as you go across, you have your top line KPIs there, and then below you have some supporting evidence. So again, left to right and top to bottom. And the logic behind this is because human beings naturally, especially in the Western world, intake information visually from left to right and top to bottom because that's how we read books and consume articles online and things like that. So it's just a little psychology trick that I like to do. And it's really, what's given me the most success in my professional career. So now that we have our basic structure laid out, let's talk about choosing the correct visual. So we have from our measurement framework a list of questions that our stakeholders asked us. So how do we pair those questions with visuals that are going to most effectively tell the answer through the KPIs that we've collected? So Domo has a great, I would call it a map of different visualizations and how they would tell you to show those. So I'm going to break this down into those 5 sections and talk about, using Domo visualizations, how you would answer specific questions. And this is available in their training as well, and they have a really great training center as well. Just doing another plug for Domo. First of all, let's talk about comparative charts. So comparative charts answer questions like how do related values compare to one another? It's one of the simplest type of charts that you can do. Some example questions are, what are our sales numbers for our products and categories, and how much has each sales rep sold? And below I have 2 examples that we can kind of talk through. So the left is a word cloud. Really cool little visualization, breaks it up from normal stuff like bar charts and tables. And you can see that we have our product subcategory labels there, and the size of the product subcategories is denoted by the amount of sales that each of them has accrued. And then on the right is just a basic table. It does have a little bit of extra functionality in that it's an expandable table, and I'll show you that when we go through the live demo in a minute. And then other charts that you can use for comparative questions are single bar charts, stacked bars, and group bars. A lot of times, this is a little side note, bar charts, I know a lot of people think that they're pretty simple, but they really are the bread and butter of the visualization world. And sometimes it's best not to overcomplicate things and just go with a good bar. The second type is a trending chart. So, trending questions are how has values changed over time? I think this is extremely important, especially in commodity businesses that are trending sales over time. So questions like what quarters are we selling more of a specific product type than another? Or like a really universal question that a lot of businesses ask is, does seasonality affect sales, and how does it affect sales? So the 2 charts that I picked for this one are a multi-line and a stacked bar chart. Both of these, you can see the x-axis trends over quarters and the y-axis is trending total sales. One comment I would make about this is if you have more than 5 dimensional values, it stops being a multi-line bar chart and a multi-bar chart, and it turns into a spaghetti and a pancake chart. And now you're just hungry and you can't get any good visualizations out of this because there's too many lines on here, there's too many slices of the bar, and you're like, I just want to go get lunch. I'm tired of looking at this. So what I would say is best practice for this, any more than 4 dimensional values, it might be worth splitting those lines into separate charts. That way you're not getting lost in the spaghetti. And now I'm hungry. Okay. The third type is distribution and geographic charts. So these are asking questions about where do things happen. So if you have, for example, regional sales or something, or maybe you have offices in different parts of the country, that would be a good example of a geographic chart. And the distribution chart is asking not always where actually in the literal sense, but maybe it's asking where things happening in the month, like that left-hand chart that I'm showing. So the 2 examples that I have are like a monthly sales chart. So this is a calendar visualization. And you can see that it has total number of sales by day, and the color darkness of each of those days denotes how many sales we had. So right away, you can see the 10th of this month, we had the most sales. And then there was a couple days in the month, it looks like 2 Mondays actually, we had no sales. So that's something to look at as well. And then, it's 2012, so pre-corona times, and we miss those days. But looking at the right, you see sales by customer state, same deal, denoted the colors, dark to light by amount of sales from each state. So just a really cool, chart there as well. And Domo has so many different maps that you can pick from and upload custom maps. I've done charts where we've had flights from one state to another, and I was able to track those visually on a chart, which is really, really cool. Because I had a customer that was trying to track the expenses for their different flights. So other charts that you can use for distribution and geographic are histograms, scatter plots, and bubble charts. Okay, so the next chart type would be composition charts as well. So these are asking, how do subsets contribute to the whole? And one thing about composition charts that I would like to call out is they're very similar to comparative charts, but the big difference is asking that comparative to the whole amount of information. So example questions are, what percentage of your revenue is from new customers versus repeating, or what industries are our clients in? And I used a pie chart here, a good old American pie chart, and love it. The one thing I would say about pie charts is they can be effective visualizations, but again, if you get into more than, I would say, 4 dimensional values, now it's a pizza chart, and hey, guess what? You're hungry again, and you're not getting any value out of this because there's too much information, or there's a bunch of little mini slivers of the pie that you're just not deriving as much value for your stakeholder. Other chart types for composition charts are funnel, waterfall, Gantt charts are really cool, and radial charts. I would use a funnel chart as like if you had a sales process from like generating leads to completing a sale. Funnels are great, and a lot of people that do dashboarding know that already, but that would just be a really good one for those kinds of scenarios. And the last one is a relationship chart. So these are asking questions about how does one data point affect another, right? Cause and effect. And there's a bunch of different questions you can ask, like how does the amount of sales training completed affect performance for salespeople? But it's really asking, how does one value affect another? A really great example, I have a heat map chart on the left here and a scatter plot on the right. Right away, you can see, if you take a look at that scatter plot on the right, we have sales on the y-axis, we have average unit price on the x-axis, and the size of each of those bubbles is the amount of profit that that region accrued over the time period that this data is representing. And the one thing that I would say is, if you look at the east region there, it had the least amount of sales because it's the lowest on the y-axis, right? But the bubble is almost as big, or if not bigger, than the central region. So what that tells me is, while the east region had less sales, they have a higher average unit price for each of the units sold, and they almost had more profit than the central region, despite the fact that they had less sales. So what is the east region doing that the other regions aren't? And that's just a quick example of an insight that I would pull straight off the chart right away. Other chart types is just a standard bubble chart, very similar to the scatter plot. Okay, so before we move on, so that was your dashboarding basics. So we have our structure, we have our design. We know we're going to do left to right, top to bottom with headers, and we know what chart types we're going to use based on the questions that our stakeholders asked. We got all our pre-work out of the way. So let's talk about taking our dashboard from the high school finals to the Lakers in the World Series, right? Or the World Championships. Geez, you can tell I'm a basketball fan. And the first way we're going to do this is by doing what's called reducing the cognitive load of our dashboard. And this is a shameless plug for Tim Wilson, because he covered this in a data visualization SDEC earlier in the year. But I just want to reiterate it because it's such a good point and it applies to dashboarding as well. So what is cognitive load? So cognitive load is the used amount of working memory resources that your brain has to do to take what it's seeing on a dashboard and turn it into short-term and then long-term memory. So the whole point of this exercise is to reduce the amount of effort that it takes to take that information from a visualization and get it into their memory. An example of this is a really cool example. So real quickly, let me see how many of you can tell me how many 5s are in this list of numbers. It takes you a minute, right? So let me ask it again, and this time let's take a look at it a little differently. Now, how many 5s are in this numbers, or in this list? It was a lot easier, right? 6. And the only thing we did was we changed the color layout of the 5s. And so what we did was we showed through visualization tools how to reduce the cognitive load that your brain took to understand how many 5s were in this list. Let's do an example inside the Domo tool now, and I'll kind of show you that. So before we used color rules, this time let's take a look at this, again, a time series bar chart here on the left. So how can we reduce the cognitive load of this report? Well, there's a lot of stuff going on. Number one, I see the title is sales by quarter, so that's already redundant. We're going to change the title, but we already know it's sales by quarter from that. So maybe we can get rid of the extraneous data labels there. We can get rid of that. And you know what? I see on the right, there's min, max, and average. I don't really care about that. I'm looking at the totals trending over time. We can put that somewhere else in the report if we really need to. And then, our y-axis, there's a bunch of extra decimal points. So let's just get rid of those. And there's a lot of other things we can do here. I don't even like this, the bar chart. If it's a trending over time, let's just do a nice simple line chart. And, right away you can see getting those total values by quarter is a lot easier in the right-hand side than it is on the left-hand side. And there's a couple other things you can do in Domo that'll show you those totals by quarter just by hovering on the chart. And we'll show you that in a live demo in a minute. So that's reducing cognitive load. So just considering the amount of information you're showing on the report is really the takeaway from that. The next tip we're going to talk about is applying what's called progressive disclosure. Big words, I know, but we're going to get into them in a second. So what is progressive disclosure? It's a concept of managing information that dictates that everything in a user interface should progress naturally from simple to the complex. You can tell my sense of humor by these images. But basically what that's saying is when your stakeholder is viewing the dashboard, you want to show him the simplest visualizations and KPIs that will get him his answers quickly and allow him, if he would so choose, to dig into the data to do so in subsequent pages or through different tools that your BI platform can utilize. And the reason I say that is because Domo has a really cool, unique feature that I'm going to show you in a second that allows you to apply progressive disclosure to your reports. So yeah. And these are called what's called drill paths. So what a drill path is in Domo is a really cool tool. It allows you to take this entire report. So you see these 4 charts here: sales by quarter, sales by product category, by product container, and the name eventually. They're just different levels of granularity of the same data, which is your total sales. So how can we take this and fit all of that into one card? You apply what's called a drill path. And what a drill path is it's a functionality that you can put in a Domo card that allows you to click into a specific bar and then see a different chart based on that filtered information that you selected in the top line chart. And in other BI platforms, this might be you have a summary page and then you have subsequent pages that get more detailed. But just make sure that on a single page, you're showing just the relevant information for your stakeholder to make those decisions that they need to make based on the questions they're asking. And then another call out here is you don't want to add too many pages or too many drill paths to a report. What that can lead to is getting your stakeholders lost in the report and inside the nitty gritty aspects of the data when your whole job was to go through those aspects and present what's relevant to the stakeholder to make his decisions or her decisions. So just keep that in mind. I would say no more than 2 drill paths or a couple subsequent pages, not 10 or 15 or too much, because it can be intimidating at that point. And then the last little tip and trick before I go into the demo is adding appropriate context. This is super simple, but a lot of times people don't catch this. For an example for that, looking at this card right here on the side, we have a text bubble that basically gives you the summary of the card, what it is, and then, oh, there's a drill path added as well. but you add that text bubble in there and it kind of takes up space. It crunches your visualization a little bit. And, you know, it would be a lot easier if you just added like a tooltip, right? Or something like that that could be concealed. And that's something you can do in Domo. It's super awesome. So you hover over the title of a card and it provides those tooltips for you. And, you know, it's just a really cool function that, you know, once you're not hovering over that card, it hides that, and it's just keeps everything nice and clean on your report. So it is important to add context to your dashboarding, because that's, you know, if you're not always going to be there to present your report, you want people to be able to navigate it. But at the same time, you don't want them to be reading through a book, right? You don't want them to be trying to, you know, sift through the text and get to the visualizations. That's the whole point of visualizations in a dashboard. Okay, so let's hop out of the presentation real quick here, and I'll show you a little quick demo of Domo, a Domo demo. So this is a report that I made specifically for this presentation. It's got the different examples, but right away you can see we talked about that left to right, top to bottom. And at the top, you have your top line KPIs. I just pulled in an example data set for this presentation. So all this is just dummy data, but you know, it's very comparable to something that you would see on a regular company's dashboard. And then again, this is that visualization tool, and you can see in Domo, if you hover over the lines, it's a pretty standard thing to have hover tooltips here as well. And these don't always have to be abbreviated. You can make them blown out numbers so you can see the details there. And right down here is that drill path. So this is kind of the meat of the demo that I wanted to show you guys. This is the drill path, right? So if I'm a stakeholder and I'm looking at this, you know, time series company sales by quarter, right? Q2 2012, we had a really good quarter. So let's kind of take a look there and see, oh, okay, so this is by product category. Looks like office supplies, we had 26% of our sales, furniture was 32%, and then technology was the big winner, right? And it seems to be consistent like that. But let's take a look at technology. Okay, so a lot of our products were those small box products. And we had some large box as well. Let's take a look at large box, because that's normally not that high on the list. Oh, okay, so we sold that Sharp 8 AL. I remember that digital copier. That's right. Okay, so this is just an example of ways that you can drill in and then come right back out in Domo real quickly and get those succinct answers. And you know, maybe in other BI platforms you can do that with subsequent pages, but it's just a good example there. Another way you can do that in Domo is called a mega table. So this is that same table. It's basically just an expandable one, but you have your product categories here on the left, and then your 3-line metrics over here. And if you want to dig in, you can totally do that. Now you see your subcategories and the totals for each of those there. And you can kind of expand them all if you want, and then just kind of wrap it back up. And at the bottom, you have your grand total line. Very cool. Here's your context example. So just to show you how easy it is to add those tooltips, you go right over here and there you go. I can even show you a little behind the scenes here, how you would create this card. Domo is really easy in the fact that it just adds those tooltips right up here. So you just type it in up there, click save, and then you're out. So just to go over a little bit more here. So, you know, because we got rid of that text box, we were able to add a filter over here for the region of sales. And what's really cool about Domo is it allows you to filter to specific, any dimensional value that you have. And the basis that it uses that for to connect to your visualizations is whether or not the filter was built on the same data source as the visualization. So in this case, I'm using one data source for all my visualizations. So when I filter this region here, it affects all the cards in this dashboard. So if you go down, so I clicked, let's see, central, let's do the west and the south for region. And let's go down. These are our examples here. Now you see that, you know, that location. Now you see only the west region and the south regions here applied. And that's for the same for all the other visualizations. We're looking at just monthly sales for those two regions. So very, very cool. A couple other things about Domo just in general, if you guys wanted to know about, you know, just the platform, you have your dashboards page here. Domo does something called alerts, which is really cool. So if you have a threshold on this card that you want to be alerted on when it hits that threshold, depending on when your data updates, you can set that alert to email you or text you or something. They also have the app stores where you would connect all your data, and then data is where you would transform that data and prepare it for visualizations. So Domo is a really cool platform. I encourage you guys to use it. But and then, you know, the last thing about dashboarding in general is Make sure that you're using your brand standards, especially if you're doing an internal report. Contact your marketing team and figure out what your brand identity is. I had the marketing team create this background image right here, and we're using colors that are specified in our brand identity. Just making sure that, especially if it's an outward-facing report for the public, that you're following those guidelines. So last section, we created the report. It's ready to present, but let's make sure that when we're presenting our dashboard, we're keeping a couple things in mind so that we present it the most effectively, and we get the value of the report and the information that we've spent so much time creating and preparing across to our stakeholders, and they share it throughout the organization. And now all of a sudden you're a hero and you get promoted, and you're king of the company now, or queen of the company, right? Basic questions you want to ask: who is this dashboard for? Who is the end user? Is this just for my stakeholder, or are they going to present this up the chain? Is this for internal use or external use? I'm doing a customer-facing dashboard right now for a company. Is it going to be used cross-departmental? Is it a cross-departmental dashboard, or is it just going to be used in our team? These questions are things you got to ask. How will it be consumed? That's a more specific question, right? Is it going to be, are people going to be looking at it inside the tool? So are they going to be looking at it inside of Domo, or are they going to be wanting to see this as a PDF print or a PowerPoint? These are all, really important questions because, we might not have super literate end users, right? Sometimes you're dealing with people who would prefer it on a PDF print, and maybe you have to show that report in multiple ways. So these are all just questions that you need to ask before you present your dashboard to your end stakeholders, so that you know how best to construct it and then present it in the appropriate way. So that's pretty much everything for me. Just make sure, if you have people who are less literate like Ron Swanson, that you're considering them in your life. Thank you, everybody. That's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, I think now is the Q&A portion.
Okay, so thanks so much, Sean. Right now, we only have 1 or 2 questions in there. So if you have any questions for Sean, please add them to the Q&A area, and we'll start with the questions that we have. But now's a great time to put them in. So first one for you, Sean, is considering a customer-centric approach, how is Domo linking these multiple data sources to the customer and its CLV measure, for example?
Yeah, so it's not a CRM, if that's what you're talking about. Oh, I lost the question. I'm sorry, it's gone. So it's asking like a customer-centric approach. Well, all I would say about that is Domo is a great way to link data sources, and I can kind of go over that if you want, but you pull in those data sources from either pre-configured connectors, or you can do it in a myriad of different ways. But I think I would love to, Adam, could you reread that question for me?
Yeah, it just says, considering a customer-centric approach, how is Domo linking these multiple data sources to the customer and its customer lifetime value measure, for example?
Well, that's something that you can calculate. So different businesses calculate lifetime value in different ways. So what I would say is Domo is very dynamic in the way that you can link your data sources. It's really just dependent on how, what data sources you're pulling in, and then how you're calculating that lifetime value. But there's no customer lifetime value equation or calculation inside of Domo, if that makes sense. I hope that answered your question. I'm sorry. If you want to follow up with that, I do have my email on the next slide. We can talk about it further.
The next question is, someone had asked, what was the name of the dashboarding tool?
It's inside of Domo. So the Domo tool is all 3 of those things. So it connects data, it transforms and manipulates it through, you can do SQL. They have an ETL interface that's really, really handy and friendly for new users. And then you can also do R. So there's a lot of different ways that you can connect the data and then transform it. As far as connections, you can do Workbench, SFTP connections, API connections. There's a lot of different ways you can get data into Domo. And then the Domo tool is what you would use for the dashboarding.
Okay. How is Domo better or different than other tools such as Google Data Studio or Tableau or Click?
That's an excellent question. So I would say it's more user-friendly than most. I know Tableau, I've used all those, and I use especially Data Studio and Tableau. I use them a lot with my work right now too. I would say Domo is a more like Data Studio, there's not a lot of data manipulation and preparation capabilities. It's really just a purely visualization tool, right? So what I find is a lot of times I have to go into like BigQuery or something and manipulate the data there and prepare it, and or some kind of offline process, and then pipe it into Data Studio to do my visualizations. The other thing is Domo has what's called beast modes, which are basically just SQL calculations that are super powerful that you don't have to do at the data set level. You can do them on the dashboard, and those can do things like, you know, case statements or calculations, any kind of like custom, you know, code that you want to apply after you do the data preparation can be done in Domo. So it's a little bit more of a, I would say, a more powerful and user-friendly interface than Data Studio. Tableau is a little more of a learning curve, I feel like. So you know, in Tableau, I'm sure a lot of people on this call can sympathize. There's a lot of training that you have to do to be able to do like a beginning to end dashboard. And in Domo, it's, you know, you can really kind of get up and running really quickly. And they have a lot of training that's, you know, really lightweight that gets you out the door and running, especially if you're already literate in business intelligence platforms.
Okay, one question that came up is, they have a copy of the PowerPoint. We will have a recording of this that is in the SDEC Slack group, but you can ping Sean if you want specific slides, but we generally give out the recording because that way you get the slides in context. Next question we have is, can we use Domo for free for a small data set? Any idea on how pricing works for Domo?
Yeah, I think I would point you to a Domo representative. I'm not sure about a free trial right now, but I do know that their pricing is dependent on the size of like how much data you're going to be using in the tool, in the instance, and also how many users you're going to apply. So it's kind of scaled towards the size of your organization. So I know, and actually, if you do want to do something like that, I can get you in contact with a Domo rep, and they can take it much more further than I do. I work more on just the actual client engagements than I do with like the sales and stuff. But I do know it's tiered towards the size of your organization.
Okay, next question. Can a report user create a graphic on the fly if he or she selects a table report? In other words, give the user access to create ad hoc reports?
Yeah, so there's different permissions that you have in Domo. So it goes all the way from just you know, privileged user, or you know, the lowest level, just a viewer, and then you can do it editor access, and then administrative is the highest. So once you have editor access, you know, in your instance, and that's tied to your login, you can save a card and or copy it, and then change the visualization, you know, in your own page on Domo, and do a lot of ad hoc reporting. It's really, really cool. There's also a function in Domo called Buzz that I could show you guys that is basically like a messenger inside of Domo that you can take screenshots of visualizations and send them off with annotations and things. The Domo people really made it a collaborative tool in that sense. So I do that a lot. Like I'll screenshot something and send it to a client, or I'll send it to someone inside Search Discovery and say, what do you think about this? Should I, you know, is this a good insight for you to kind of analyze, or I caught this, and, you know, what do you think? So yes, is a short answer to that question.
Okay, next question. How does Domo deal with data sources that are and must remain behind a firewall, such as on-premise?
Yep. So there is an on-premise option. Yeah, you can. That's a function of the data ingestion section of Domo. They're, you know, especially if it's an encrypted data source, they can handle those securities, predicates, and things like that. You know, I have a client that uses single sign-on for all their, you know, logins and things like that, and that's a layer of security that Domo can apply to their login as well. But yeah, you can do on-premise data sources behind a firewall. There's ways that you can get around that. Full disclosure, I'm more of the, you know, presentation and dashboarding, and we have people at Search Discovery who are much more technical that could get much deeper into that question. But if you want to, shoot me an email with that question, and I can send you, set you up with the right person.
And while we're talking, Sean, will you put your contact info up on the slide?
Yeah.
Just so people have it.
Here you go, everybody. Yeah, it's my email right there.
Next question. Was the calendar chart that was shown a default Domo chart, or did you create that on your own?
That is actually a default chart. So it's, they have so many visualizations, and that was one that I found that I've used before, and it's something that's straight out of the box in Domo. I have done some custom stuff with like GeoJSON and latitude longitudes. Remember, I told you guys earlier about a flight path one that I did that I was super proud of, because I actually had to pull in a separate data source with the calculated latitudes and longitudes and lay that on a map, and we were able to track the client's flights across the world, and filter it by the dates that they were flying and how many hours they flew and things like that. It was really cool.
And then we've got kind of a generic question. What is or are your favorite features of Domo?
Oof. Okay, that's loaded. I would say the fact that it's an end-to-end, right? So a lot of other BI, I think my favorite features would be what I'm missing in some of the other BI platforms, and that is, a lot of platforms either have a high level of high barrier to entry because there's a lot you need to learn about the tool, or they do really good at one aspect of the dashboarding, which is like they have really detailed visualizations, but there's not much in the data preparation and consumption, or they do the opposite, like we have to go to do data preparation somewhere else, and then there's a limited amount of visualizations. So I would say that Domo just does a great job across the board with all the the beginning to end processing, and also it's just a really easy tool to pick up.
Okay, and I think the last question we'll get to is, are there any limitations of Domo, maybe ones that you've kind of run into, or ones that you had to work around?
Yeah, I would say there's some things just in the, there are some, and the stuff we have to work through. So, they have a good Domo community support and help, but I've had to do things like, one specific example is I was trying to filter a page and then print it out and send it, or like the PDF printable export function is definitely a good example of a limitation, because you have to structure your report in a landscape view. And that's something that they're working on updating, but it's just a limitation that I found. And then going back to that filter example, the filters still appeared on my PDF print. Like, so in the little bottom right corner, I can even show you. If you filter this report by one of these, you'll get a little blue filter at the bottom. And that's great in indicating that the page has been filtered, but when you print it out, I had a client that said, can we get rid of that? And you couldn't on the printable version. So there's little limitations like that you have to just kind of message the Domo people and say, hey, can we get this changed or removed? And they've done that. Yeah, there are a little bit of limitations as well. And then in terms of data consumption and things like that, I've uploaded data sets into the Domo platform that's millions of rows, and we have instances where they have 10,000 data sets. So I would say compared to other BI platforms, it's definitely more robust in the back end, but there are still some limitations, yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, maybe throw your contact information out there one more time, just in case people need it. But Sean,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for presenting, and I hope this was helpful for those of you who either use Domo or want to learn a little more. If you have any other questions, let us know, and we will post a recording of this into the Slack group later today.
Thank you guys very much. Awesome.